could I ask everyone to come on up, and then I will introduce it. I'm going to sit there. Yeah. Okay. So I am going to, first of all, I want to introduce the panel. And I'll go to my left and across the board. So LaShana Lewis, who you've been introduced to in a way, leads LM Lewis Consulting to improve business diversity and inclusion efforts worldwide. And I met LaShana a few years ago, and her story, her insights were deeply influential with me. And I would say, LaShana, meeting you actually changed my own path and my own trajectory, so thank you for that. And then next, David Shaw, who is a talent executive at Accenture, our partners in developing this report. And Accenture, of course, is in an industry where talent is paramount. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from Dave about how this untapped talent pool, this enormous talent pool, how that plays out in a kind of a talent-intensive industry and beyond. And then next, Elizabeth Lindsey, who's the CEO of Byte, which is a terrific organization that trains stars and others, but for technical job roles here in DC and Baltimore. And I'm happy to say that Byte is one of the first training providers that Opportunity at Work will be working with on our Stars Talent Marketplace that will be launching in DC to actually help make these connections between mid-sized small businesses who want to hire stars and the training programs and the other kind of alternative routes there. And then Dan Bryant of Walmart, whose company must be the biggest employer of stars in the U.S. And Walmart has a number of work-in-progress initiatives to build opportunities and pathways for stars inside Walmart, and has been a great partner. And Dan emphasizes that these are work in progress, and we want to hear about the progress, but we really want to hear about the work and what needs to be done. And then Professor Peter Blair, an economist at Harvard's Graduate School of Education, who's been an extraordinarily engaged and inspiring member of what's already an all-star Stars Insights advisory panel that Opportunity Work put together to make sure that the caliber of the research reflected in this report could stand scrutiny, could give us real insight, and could provide the basis for building a new research agenda so we get better answers over the long haul. So I couldn't be more thrilled with this panel. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a conversation in the panel and a few questions that I'm going to pose. But then we were planning to have, if we were going to have everyone, we were going to have people here in person, we were planning to have kind of Q&A from the audience. So instead we've decided to keep our Q&A, but to have the panelists ask each other questions, because I think they reflect the full range of the institutions and individuals that need to solve this problem. And maybe they can learn something from each other, and we can all learn something together. So that's the goal. So I'm going to start out to ask each of you the why question first. Why do you think this topic matters, the report? Like, what are the stakes for you, for your organization? And I want to start with you, LaShana, because I feel like the most underrated kind of learning in this entire field is learning from the actual experience of people who have both struggled with these barriers and particularly who've overcome them. So I'd love to hear from you first. Why does this matter? What is this about for you?
Well, the truth of it is that, I'm one of millions. So I'm not the only person that went through the pathway that I did or had the same experiences. So I know a lot of people probably expect me to think about me, because I'm like on the screen and telling stories and things like that. But in reality, I run into people on a daily basis, and I'm saying every single speaking engagement that I've done, which, thanks to what's happened since 2015, I've done a lot of speaking engagements. You got to look at me. I'm a nerd, okay? We don't talk to people. That is the thing that we're known for. But it gave me this platform to be able to kind of speak and tell my story. And every single time, I would get no less than 3 people to come up to me and say, this is my story. My uncle went through this. I went through this. I know other people in my family that are going through this. What can I do? How can I change it? So, the importance of it is that it exists. And it's something that we need to kind of address, because now it's becoming so wide that we have hundreds of thousands of tech jobs that are just empty, that are sitting there, that are not getting filled with people who probably already had the skills and they just needed to be matched up to be able to do that job with maybe a little extra training. And I say this to every single person. Every job I've ever had, you still need to train. You still need to do the learning portion. You still need to understand the ins and outs. Especially when I went to MasterCard, a lot of that was proprietary. There's no school that could have taught me anything about half of the systems that are there, because they were specially designed there. But I had a good basis. And there are a lot of people in the United States that have a good basis and can grow from there. And we just need to find another way to surface that.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. And so, Dave, I want to take it to you, because we talked, LaShana, you're talking about what happens when you get to a company, and what's the role of a company in training, and like what's the role, like just open the doors and the opportunity. Now, Accenture obviously is a huge talent business. You're particularly skilled, even internally, at sort of matching, skills and talent to task. How do you see this problem and the opportunity here?
Yeah, it's a great question. Our clients, most of our clients come to us looking for specific answers and most likely solutions around how to actually find and distribute the talent that they have into different jobs, because the talent basically is things that they can't really touch and feel. They need to actually build that talent. Specifically, companies that come to us with that intent are looking to actually source different pools of talent. And STARS actually is one of those pools of talent that is kind of unseen, and they need to actually open that up and drive a whole bunch of talent procurement basically in a different way. Mm-hmm. Schools of thought around this go to really the fact that companies are lazy. They have job descriptions that really are actually focused on past job descriptions and not the skills that are really required for the jobs that they're going to put people into. And so therefore the better matching happens when the currency becomes skills themselves. So actually at Accenture, we're looking at how to actually match those skills and build those skills to put people in a position so they can actually seek and receive those job opportunities regardless of their background, and then obviously take the path that they need to take from that point forward.
That's great. So Elizabeth, I mean, that's a nice setup for you, because I mean, what you do is to kind of take people who clearly have a lot of potential, who often have a lot of skills, and give them the bridge, like both the skill bridge and some of the access bridge to companies. And so how does this, does this matter for you, this kind of work, this kind of insight, and why?
This absolutely matters. When we look at our economy and how it's changed, the digitalization of the workforce has led to an increasing gap between those with skills that are recognized by employers and those who have incredible skills and that aren't recognized. And at Byte, we train hundreds of stars every year, people who have really hard jobs like working in retail or food service, people who take care of their families. When I was looking at the wonderful data that Papia shared, I was thinking about my mom, who spent most of her life either in very low-wage careers or managing a household of 4 children on a very limited budget. When you think of that skill set, the value of that and how it was just completely undervalued. And at Byte, we see the potential. So we provide training and technology to stars of all ages, and we help them get industry-recognized certifications. And our students thrive. It is unbelievable. Like LaShana, I'm so just moved and amazed and inspired by your story. But once they have a little bit of training and support, they're able to move into incredible jobs in IT, in office settings where they are promoted, and on average they're making almost $28,000 a year more than they were before coming to Byte. I mean, they're moving into the middle class with training and support.
That's great. And Dan, some of the people doing hard jobs, right, are doing them at Walmart. And I mean, I think one of the things that's so interesting is how much you actually do learn. And Walmart's done more over time to both recognize that and build on it. But I mean, I think we still have a long way to go in this country. And you've said we have a long way to go in your company. How do you think about, what does this mean to you? Can this help on the journey, and how? What needs to happen?
Thank you, Byron. First, thank you. You and your extraordinary team here at Opportunity at Work. We are delighted to be partnering with you on this, so kudos. Senator Warner, wherever you are, thank you. Who kicked us off a few minutes ago. His leadership has been difference-making, and he really has created vital space in Congress and amongst a policy cohort to really try to get our act together. This matters profoundly to us because the stars are us in a real sense. I mean, each of the cohorts that are constituent parts of the 71 million are the backbone of Walmart. So we are being carried along by the 5 million high-skilled, high-wage cohort. We're being challenged to really think about how to do more with that 30 million cohort that have the skills but don't yet have the wages to match. And then how do we be meaningfully part of upskilling that remainder cohort? I mean, this is Walmart's future. To the extent that we succeed in tackling some of these fundamental workforce issues, we will succeed as a company in a highly competitive business arena, but we'll succeed in terms of the ethical sustainability of our company. We'll succeed as a company that really does need to be getting it right across different shareholders, different stakeholders, as Senator Warner so ably put it. The other thing I would commend about what you all have done here is so much of the challenge as we are here partnering with really thoughtful thought leaders and policy leaders related to workforce challenges and the future of the workforce. It's the common language problem, and you all are really taking a giant step forward, giving us a common language. Too often we are 100 people with good faith in a room together with 100 different languages. And it's so hard then to agree on vocabulary and linguistic rules so that we can do this better to get to better economic and workforce outcomes. So you all have taken a giant step forward in terms of helping us with a common vernacular that I think accelerates our getting to actions and solutions.
Thank you. Peter, you are an economist and a physicist in your spare time. I mean, you've got the biggest of big pictures here. Does this kind of work make a difference? And what do you see as the potential?
It is phenomenal to be here with all of you. This work is incredibly important on a national, even an international scale, but also on a personal scale too. Byron, you and I were talking about this, and as I was preparing to come here from Boston amidst everything that's going on, I started to think, I'm a star too, in the sense that I went to community college. So right now I'm a professor at Harvard University, an affiliate at the National Bureau of Economic Research, but I went to community college. And I remembered how some folks looked at me when they saw that, and how that changed when I went to Duke. And that was one of the things that really got me to think a lot about education, because oftentimes we conflate education with pedigree. And so I'm deeply personally drawn to this work from my own experience. And I think one of the reasons why it's important to have such a broad collaboration of folks who have experience in policy, in industry, and also people who themselves are stars is because we can get to see a broad picture of all of the stakeholders. And this is what Senator Warner was saying, right? Because it's not enough for academics to sit in our offices and to write papers in a way that's disconnected from what the specific concerns of the economy are. It's not enough for business leaders to think about how do they solve their own business problem without thinking about how that fits into the broader conversation about what's happening with the economy and how are we training people for the long haul too. And so in a lot of ways, I think what's been valuable to me about this work is the way in which we all have a part to play in terms of this kind of stakeholder view of capitalism. And I think it's important to get academics on board precisely because we are at the forefront of the traditional ways in which folks are trained. I'm at an educational school. And so this is deeply personal for us. I'm also at the oldest school in the US, Harvard University. And so we should be taking a lead on this in a way that's going to be important for shaping these sorts of conversations.
Well, in that spirit, I want to get down to some brass tacks. We're not going to sort of figure out every problem here, and certainly not every solution. But I'd love to hear what barriers or what problems. We just heard from a bunch of people here representing lots of different fields who want to get this right, who think it's important to do. What's stopping us? right? Like what barriers are we hitting? And I think it's important to surface those honestly so that then we can figure out how to get at it. I don't know, LaShana, if you want to start from like just like some of the specifics, and we can just sort of talk about how it's being seen from different perspectives.
Sure. I think you kind of hit something on the nail when you're saying the laziness, the going and just using something that was already done before and just kind of plastering it on and trying to move on and get things going.
So like the job descriptions.
Yeah, the
and how-
job descriptions and just saying, okay, it's the same thing, or going and asking the other people who work that job and say, well, what do you have? Oh, okay, well, all you guys have bachelor's degrees, so that must be what is needed. And it's just like, no, actually sit down and take the time and look at this and see how is it instrumental in either blocking or allowing certain people to be able to transition. We think about things like, I remember there used to be full service gas stations. I just kind of aged myself. So, but I remember.
Not if you're from New Jersey.
Exactly. But I remember full service gas stations, and there were attendants that would come out and they would check all the different things and things like that. And now full service gas stations are, few and far between, except for New Jersey. So, but you didn't hear this, huge outcry. It's like, what's happening with all the people who used to work full service? It's like they transitioned into doing another job. Those skills were useful somewhere else. And I think we have stopped doing that for some reason. There is a reason, and now it's just like, how do we figure out what that reason is, and then yank at it and say, you know what, we need to stop doing whatever this is and actually look at people as human beings that can change and want to change and want to learn. They're not computers, they're not mechanic systems. They aren't designed just for one thing. And I think we've gotten into that mentality. So now once we start to address something like that and say, you know what, this human being probably, they were okay with doing full service because that was what was accessible at the time. But now, let's say, hey, what do you think about this? This seems to kind of apply and have the same kind of mechanisms of thinking that was similar to what you did. What do you think about something like that? And 9 times out of 10, whenever I talk to someone about what I do in computers, they're in some sort of other industry. And they were like, I always wanted to try coding, but I was afraid because that's a change. And people were like, you've been doing X, Y, Z for so long. Why do you want to do this? So it's like, twofold. People want to change. We just have to kind of accept that and then try to build things moving forward to help it be a lot easier for them.
That's great.
Yeah, I think it would be great to build on actually that question because, for example, Dave, I mean, like Accenture in assessing skills internally, right, is like must be very sophisticated and have lots of different ways of doing it. But then and it's true of some other companies too. But like, so why this like laziness? Like, why is the job description this cut and paste thing? It's like, oh, you need a bachelor's degree. Like, bachelor's degree is 18,000 different things. It's not even a thing.
Yeah. Right.
So how could it be that, like, that's what you need for, like, that just seems, you used the word lazy. I mean,
I did.
I could use the word, I could use the word sort of stupid, right? I mean, it's like, what, does that make any sense? No, but seriously, but it's done, so it must be for a reason, but why is that?
It's a good problem. I probably answered your second question with my first answer with barrier. I believe there's 2 other barriers as well as the laziness and job descriptions. I think the currency that we're going to deal with is skills. And so therefore, one of the most important things that we need to do is not be lazy to have a machine learning or AI tool screen a resume that then screens out somebody that doesn't have an educational background instantaneously. So letting a computer decide who has good computer skills has nothing to do with that. What we need to do is figure out a different way to demonstrate and actually pull those skills to the forefront. Whether that person gets the job or not, maybe not, but more importantly, at least they're in the pool of applicants that actually make sense. So I believe that one of the ways that we can think about that is how we gamify. And gamify doesn't necessarily mean like, play Fortnite. Gamify means basically put people into a position where they can demonstrate the skills that they have and how adjacent those skills might be to jobs of the future. And when we do that, I think what we actually open up is not what's on a piece of paper that you earned 4 years or at a school, but really where you are relative to the skills that are required for that job. And we can do that today and do that really fairly in a very unbiased way, and that allows that pool to be richer. The aperture grows with that type of result. I think that's a really good thing to think about.
I think that sounds amazing. I think one of the barriers that LaShana was speaking to a bit is also the psychological impact of being someone who has talent that's not recognized at all. And with our Byte Back adult learners, we often see folks who are coming in with a real lack of confidence because they are operating in a society that says unless you have a bachelor's degree, then your work and your brilliance is worth less. I also think, in addition to the algorithms, I'm really glad you mentioned that because computers can't read even, looking at someone's applying for an IT job and they might have worked helping their neighbor's computers, right? Computers can't read that. I also think there are just so many deep barriers related to people who are living in poverty. So what we see is that no matter how excited someone might be about coming to Byte Back for training, if they can't afford a Smart Trip card to get to class, if they don't have childcare and their child is sick and they can't afford someone to come in, these are, housing is such a huge one as well. And so I think when we're thinking about stars, we really need to think holistically. How do we support them not just on the training, but on their lives so that they can participate in this training and move into jobs?
I think we need, LaShana, Elizabeth, savvy, computer savvy, systems thinkers to help us here. We have a big collective action problem, which is that it's so hard to quantify the range of activities that make up the range of skills that have significant value and that need to be recognized as essential and valuable. It's so hard to quantify that across the full continuum of skills being deployed in the subsidiary activities that make up those skills. So we really do need to do some serious crunching to understand all of those different skills, their dimensions, the subsidiary activities, and standardize that to the greatest degree possible. To your point, think of how hard it is, how hard it has been for, millennia or at least centuries to figure out what a BA or a BS means coming out of a four-year college. And we've been doing that actually for centuries, and we still don't have clarity. So in a sense, let's give ourselves a little bit of breathing room. This is hard. But the great thing is to see this accelerating consensus that a skills orientation and validating a skills mastery of a certain level is the better way for business and policymakers and society to move. So that consensus is now forming is invaluable. We continue to think about access, stability, and mobility, and defining the degree to which we are making progress as a company against, are we driving down those gratuitous barriers to entry in terms of the formal economy? Secondly, stability. How can we build in greater stability? To Elizabeth's observations just now of all of the obstacles that have to be overcome by so many that really can be enormously valuable in the workforce. And then thirdly, how can we become that truly effective, always-on training platform? In a sense, Walmart has become the largest always-on training organization in the world that happens to sell a lot of stuff. We've moved 500,000 people through different channels of upskilling and training over the last 3 years because we have to own this imperative just as it relates to really taking care of our workforce and benefiting optimally from our workforce.
Right. Peter, you're listening to all this, and I know how you take things in so quickly and make sense of them, but there must be barriers to researchers, to the academy. Why isn't research contributing more to this right now? And what needs to change for that to help, for it to be more part of the solution?
Yeah, this is a really rich conversation. Whenever you see me looking down, that means I'm thinking. I'm trying to use all my faculties to focus. in a way, the NBR working paper that we did was precisely to speak to that gap, right? So we have two differentiated products. We have this product, which is the policy document that somebody who wants the headlines can read. It's 5 pages, it's very succinct, nice figures. And then we have the academic paper that says, how can we situate the findings of this report within the context of a literature so that somebody who is going to do a 5-year PhD and then have a 30 or 40-year research career would actually say, I want to devote my life to thinking about these sorts of questions. Something that's really powerful is most people who go on to do PhDs, for the most part, they want to change the world. They want to do research that they think is really important. Now, to get there, you have to develop a certain set of skills. And what could happen at the end of that 5-year period is that you could lose a vision for like why you came to do the work, and you can gain this deep love for the skills, right? And so specifically thinking about barriers through the lens of the report that we put together, the NBR working paper that we put together, was to really say, well, why might it be the case that there exist folks who have the relevant skills, like Papia said, but then they're working in jobs where they're earning lower wages? Well, it could be that firms are rationally inattentive. They're just used to looking in particular labor markets, and there's cost to like learning how the skills of somebody who might be a homemaker balancing a tight budget could map into a job in another context. And so in a sense, there's a whole literature about rational inattention. There's a whole literature about behavioral economics that we can then tether these findings to. And so an academic who's been trained to respond to that literature and to think about these questions within that framework, all of a sudden, it's about something specific that they have been trained to think about, right? And so LaShana's story is going to grip the general public in a particular way, and then thinking about how we translate that story into like a language that an academic can understand can then give them, it can help them to see how their tools can be responsive to the very important questions that we face in the US labor market. And so that's really the goal of the academic piece of the work that we've done.
And so I want to ask, before we go into you asking each other questions, I guess my last question is, what makes you think we can solve this problem? I guess, what gives you hope as you sit here?
For me, we have to solve it. Yeah. We have to solve it. There are too many, 71 million, it's a lot. We have to solve the problem. So it's not, for me, an if, it's a when.
I think there's 3 actors in this play. I think companies seek better pools of talent to actually absorb and hopefully create the mobility for themselves to new business models. The second actor is the communities that we all live in are really impacted by not solving this issue. And so therefore it becomes something that LaShana basically says we have to. And I think the third actor is the individuals. The people want a better set of opportunities. And so by actually activating the way that we perceive their skills to be valuable and actually allowing them to actually seek that out, we are actually giving them a new platform for growth. And so I think those 3 actors in the play are all kind of looking at the same thing together. And I think that because of that, that's what's gonna help it.
I feel really hopeful that Walmart is here and that Accenture is here, that there are employers who really believe in this right now. It's felt for a few years that we've really been kind of swimming upstream as providers, so it's really exciting.
I would echo all of the above. We have to. And the upsides, the commercial benefit upsides for companies that do this better than those that don't are real. I mean, there's a premium to be had here in the marketplace for companies that do a better job of figuring out how to upskill effectively and tap into upskilled people in the marketplace. So I think the economics are going to lead more and more of us to this place, but we have to do it with really smart people who are helping us develop that common framework.
Peter?
From where I sit, I think that one of the reasons why I'm hopeful is that we all have a stake in this for like different reasons. So as an educator, I have a stake in it because that's my job, is to really see young people grow and develop and thrive. For business leaders, this is really important, both for you being able to produce goods and services, but also to produce the people that are going to purchase your goods and services as well too, right? And as a broader society, like there's, in a sense, a collective arrangement that we've all made to like live and to do life together. And if you look at the way in which we're responding to the current crisis with the coronavirus, like everyone's like just, we're fist bumping, we're like doing the things that we need to do to make sure that the disease doesn't spread. And so for different reasons, we're all invested in solving this problem. I think us coming together, and I think this was the point that was made by Elizabeth, that allows us to see how interconnected both our aspirations are, and then also, by extension, our actions can also be like interconnected as well too. And when that happens, we're going to tap into some synergies that will not only allow us to kind of like solve this problem, but to really unlock like new opportunities and new potentials for the stars, for the U.S. labor market, and then I think more broadly how other societies can think about solving these questions too.
Yeah, and I'm gonna say. Before we go into the lightning round of kind of cross-questioning here, I'm going to say what makes me hopeful. First of all, like just building on what Peter just said, I mean, people are actually problem solvers.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There's such a weird, to me, weird kind of narrative, like coming from business where I worked for most of my career, where it's like war for talent and like how do you sort of get at this talent, to then the sort of the policy side of things where it's all like, oh, you know, these poor people, what could they possibly do? Like, but it just like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, people are amazingly curious, creative problem solvers. Like, I mean, I the other day, I remember dropped some papers on the street and 6 strangers suddenly self-organized in less than an instant to all move like in relation to each other's bodies, pick everything up and bring it all together. They weren't paid. They weren't they weren't directed. They weren't. But stuff like that happens all the time, right? In a funny way, what makes me optimistic is that what's undermining us isn't people and their talent and their instincts and their abilities. What's undermining us is the systems we've overlaid. I mean, we're spending tens of billions of dollars in redundant infrastructure right now to stop people from trying, right? To blind us to like what someone can do. So in other words, do less of that is actually a pretty easy way to start making progress. And if you take away that crutch, right, of these sort of like random degree requirements, I have a great deal of confidence that businesses will figure out better ways to tap into this talent. Because in fact, I think that is, I don't think that's an advantage for business, it's a convenience, but honestly, it's a self-harm because you're missing this talent. I couldn't agree more with what Dan had to say. Like, this is talent, these are competitive assets, and the companies that get this right first will actually start winning. They absolutely will. And if we can get that right, and if we can open up the door to more of this talent, then a lot of the things that people think are a negative thing can become a positive, right? So we think about automation or like AI as a negative, but of course, I think the best use of machine learning is for human learning, right? And if anyone who had some of the skills but not all, most of the skills but not all, could like get that shot, you could use, right? You could use AI to help accelerate their path and to train them and so forth. So, but if you don't let them try, if they can't move forward, then the ROI on an investment like that would be nil. If you train someone with low pedigree to a high level of skill, but then an employer won't consider them, then that kind of public investment in that training will be considered a failed investment. But it's not because the person can't learn. On the contrary. So I think there's a relatively small number of things we could do if we all did them together that would allow us to make tremendous progress. And I'm super excited about that because Opportunity at Work, the role we're playing is precisely to create this sort of utility from a data and a matching and then a scaling standpoint so that all the great work that we're hearing about can actually kind of connect and rise. So I am actually as hopeful now as I've been for, since starting to work on this problem. Okay, so with that said, I am going to be very light touch. It's going to be a free-for-all, so like get ready. Now, seriously, any of you, the rules of the next 15 minutes are, if you have a question for someone else, something that you think could help you do your work better or understand something, ask away.
I have a question for LaShana. As in your position as a shining star, I'm curious about what aspect of the structure that we've been talking about between employers and training providers, hiring process, what was hardest for you? What was the biggest barrier?
For me, the biggest barrier was being told no so much that I didn't believe the very first time I was sitting in MasterCard interviewing that I was actually going to get the job. And I know that seems kind of very plain, but I've talked to a lot of different people. And like I said, at almost every speaking engagement, I talk to people and we have that shared moment where we're just like, okay, I'm finally here. I think I'm being seen, but is it real? Is it real? You know, we've lived in this alternate reality for a very long time that sometimes when the opportunity is presented, you know, and I'm putting myself back in that seat, that you don't exactly know how it's going to turn out anymore. And then you go on in your head and you're like, okay, this will be over within an hour. Let me go back to going to Indeed.com or Monster.com and looking for my job, or go to back to, in my case, to LaunchCode and say it didn't work out or whatever. But it's not necessarily a sad thing. It's just, it is a barrier to get over.
Absolutely.
And some people walk out and they say, you know, it didn't happen, I'm not going to get it, and things like that. And I was like, well, first, don't do anything. Wait. You know, wait for them to call you to let you know. But, you know, to be able to get over that first barrier, and then I can actually supplement and say, okay, now the next thing you need to know is that you're interviewing the company as much as they're interviewing you. And then they're like, oh, okay, I actually have some autonomy in this. And I'm like, absolutely. And then you kind of build up from there. But just to kind of get over that first hump. So you may see this star. This star may be, you know, accessible and available and sitting right in front of you. But you might not know that on the other end, they're just like, this is the 700th interview I've been on. So will this person actually see me, or are they here because, you know, maybe I check a box? Maybe, you know, I'm here because it looks really nice for them on paper. Do they actually see the value that I bring to the table?
Yes,
So,
imposter syndrome
Exactly.
is real.
Absolutely.
And I don't think it ever goes
Absolutely.
away. Thank you so much.
Something I wanted to put on the table, and I'll probably direct my question to Dave and Dan, is what could be done internally to companies to, one, clarify like what the correct like pathways are to particular jobs within the companies. I'll give you kind of an example in terms of like, so I run a research lab of about 5 or 6 PhD students, and like whenever they come in, I say, what's your goal? Do you want to go into academia, industry, or whatever? I don't want to set your goal, but once you tell me what your goal is, then we can figure out like how do you navigate this PhD so that you have the skills and the experiences to get where you want to go. And we have 5 years to build that. So it doesn't matter where you are, like as long as you're teachable, we can like get you there, right? And one thing that I want to put on the table is like, what are some like clear ways for us to really say, here are some jobs, here are the skills and the things that you need to get these jobs. And so that way folks as early as like high school can say, I want to be there, here's what I need to go there. So either that means I can get more utility out of knowing exactly what I need to do in college, or maybe I don't need to go to college, and then I know exactly what the certificates are that I can get. Like, can we be more transparent about like what the specific pathways are?
That's great.
That's a great
You want to go first? No.
Sure. It's the right question, and you've put your finger on something that's really hard for even companies that are trying to be serious about seeing clustering of skills and skills as having intrinsic value and being better than a credential just by itself. We are trying to tackle the challenge of how do you connect the skills you need with the next job and the career pathway. We're grappling with that now internally. Part of the way we're seeking to address it is we have stood up an academies program. We have 200 academies, which are classrooms, which are now high tech, through which we have had more than 400,000 associates move over the last 3 years, where they get a range of business training, retail-specific training, team and leadership and softer skills training, which is part of the way we have built this upskilling capability. And in that context, we're trying to bring back into that upskilling that goes on during this multi-week training, the identifying the kinds of next jobs that this upskilling will make more credible.
Okay. And if I can interject for a quick second. So how do you split the difference between the needs of the business and then the desires of the individual, right? Because in some sense, it could be that as a company, we want to fill these specific needs, and so we provide these. And then on the other hand, the individual says, I want to go and become X, and what's my pathway to becoming X?
If they're right, you encourage them to do it.
Okay.
No, it's a good question, and David's going to answer it.
It's like Match.com internally. It's like you have to figure out exactly what people want to do and match them to the desires and the pathways that you have open and are trying to actually fulfill. I believe there's actually something that we have with scale here, and Walmart and Accenture are very large organizations, which is great, meaning we have, for Accenture, we're well over 500,000 employees globally. That scale allows us to have the intellect and kind of the data to actually figure out those pathways, I think, that are most suitable, and the adjacencies of the skills to actually get a person in a position to do their best and most meaningful work to them. It might not be the best and most meaningful work to me, their boss, but I need to get an opportunity for them to actually do that. And I think the opportunity that we have here is probably kind of a payback from society of companies our size to actually bring the data of adjacency skills back to some sort of central repository, if I will, to drive that conversation around how those pathways become more universal. And so people can actually not necessarily have to leave a company to go find their spot, but actually find their spot maybe within mobility in their own organization because they see the adjacencies of the skills.
I like where you started it, and I like where you took it, because in a sense, like when we have coordination across all of the industries, in a sense, like your future talent pool is coming from Walmart, its future talent pool is coming from you. And to the extent that you see this as like kind of like trade, you're fine to train up somebody else who might leave your company because somebody else is training someone who's going to be your future employee as well too, right? And so one of my hopes is that we can kind of like elevate the conversation to the point where we're all kind of like coordinating in a very like multi-sector way, so that we're not narrowly looking at talent as this is my bucket, I have this specific need to fill, but it's more how can we promote human flourishing, and when we do that, we have a broader labor market that's more productive for us, but also people are engaging in like a lot more like meaningful work in a directed way.
That's great. Thank you.
That's true. But just to put it out there, if you become an employer, a firm that's seen to be good at training, better at training, that also increases your retention. So we're happy to share our trained up people with others, but the good news is we improve retention by doing that, and we get all of the varied value of that expressing itself throughout the business.
And to what you're saying, I do have a question. One of the things I do with the St. Louis Equity and Entrepreneurship Collective is I basically do the same thing that basically Byron is doing with STARS, but I do that for entrepreneurs, particularly people of color and women-funded businesses. And one of the things that we kind of press on to them is, understand the value of your company, understand the value of what you bring. But that's kind of based off of some certain economic statistics that I'm sure I could bring up, but will be really boring right now. But the whole point is that what do you look for when you're looking for value in a potential employee?
Great question.
The value that I see is I know this sounds really dramatically simple, is really a love of learning.
Okay.
I think that, to your point, actually you made a very, very strong point. Like at MasterCard, you couldn't have learned 75% of what it was, but you actually were able to be in a position to do that upon entry.
Right.
And I think that love of learning isn't something that you just stumble upon a week before your interview. It's a lifelong thing that we actually need to have.
Right.
And when you have that, and you can see it in people, it becomes not a performance issue. It becomes something that actually people build careers on. And that allows them to kind of do their best and most meaningful work. So I think that level of learning is the place to go.
Sort of the dignity of work, but there's a corollary, the dignity of learning. And we can't all get the dignity of work right if we're not also affirming that lifelong learning precept that is so important. Can I ask Elizabeth a quick question?
Yeah.
So think out loud if you would, and maybe others will have a thought. This collective action problem, how do we standardize the way we define a quantum of skills that are useful? Sometimes we talk about this in terms of how do we credential, skill sets.
Right.
The faster we can move on standardizing the way we agree on credentialing those skills, the better. What can we do to get our act together faster in that regard, do you think?
It's a great question. I think definitely starting with some definitions. I love the list of that beautiful, colorful chart that Papia showed. Critical thinking, confidence, communication skills. I think starting with what are the key skill sets. I also think that, like you said, really collecting the data on a broader scale. I worry that the folks who we teach and folks like LaShana, those skills aren't necessarily being counted or seen when we're looking at data sets. And I know that to be true. So I think those are two pathways forward. I'm wondering if anyone else has. That's a big question.
I want to build on something that you said, because the example that you gave, Elizabeth, of the mom who was managing a tight budget, that was my mom, right? Single parent, 7 kids. After everything was done, she had $37 a month, and so we had to sell fruits and vegetables on the weekend, even though she was a college professor. And I'm going to leave this conversation thinking about the issue of measurement, right? And Byron, you've raised this several times when we've had our group calls too, in saying what are some of the sectors of the economy where we're not even measuring the skills? Because in our report, we're measuring the skills of people who are seen to be working, right? But what about folks who are engaged in home production, moms and dads who are at home? Can we begin to quantify what are the skills that they're deploying in the rearing of their children, and then create a dictionary or a map between those specific skills and what they could do in the labor market once their kids would be of school age, right? So that's kind of
negotiation, persuasion,
right?
Exactly.
So that's and I wanted to just build
self-restraint.
And I want to build very, very, very gently too, Dave, on the point that you raised, which was about a curiosity of learning, and I'm completely the same way too. So I started my career at Clemson University in South Carolina, and I loved being in a state school because we drew a broad cadre of folks, right? In a way that's very different from how we draw at Harvard, and I love being at Harvard as well too. But in a lot of ways, I often say, is this person teachable? Because if they're teachable, I have 5 years to train them. I don't need somebody to be a quote-unquote star in the traditional sense coming into a PhD program if I have 5 years and if I'm confident in my ability and in the process of my university, right? And so I think something that we ought to be thinking about as well, too, is yes, we should measure quanta of skills, but I think we should also measure quanta of teachability and willingness to persevere through things. Because if somebody is teachable, there's nothing that they can't learn with enough time.
Well said.
And I think that's so hard. So Byte is also an employer. We have 20 employees, but because we're so small, we do have to often rely upon what did you do in the past? And we will have an interview and maybe we can get a sense of if somebody is teachable. But I think many employers would love some more information on how we can measure it.
Because where that kind of information comes through is in letters of recommendation. So for example, I sit on several admissions committees at Harvard. And if somebody says this person is the best person that I've seen in my life, X, Y, Z, so on and so forth, that means something to me, above and beyond just what the grades are, right? I can look past grades that seem not the highest grades if that person says there's something special about this person, and that gets them kind of in the door. And I don't think we should shy away from that because it's it's hard to measure, it's kind of squishy, right?
That's really helpful.
And two, what that does is it builds up the reputation of the recommender, right? Because if you become known, Elizabeth, as somebody says, you know what, this person, she is amazing. She will learn whatever you put in front of her. I don't have a way of measuring that, but you trust me with this one, and she's going to kick butt. And then they come back to, Elizabeth, I want some more folks like her.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
So we're getting to the moment where the official program says that all these brilliant people walk away, and then I sort of tell you a bunch of things, and we have all the answers then. And I just want to, any of you who are looking forward to that part, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I'm going to change it up. That's not what I'm going to do. Okay, here's what I am going to do, because I've been listening to these questions, and I have some questions too. And my questions are about because we are doing some things at Opportunity at Work, not just this report, but the work we're doing to try to enable this field, which I think speak to a lot of this. But it's been incredibly important, this interaction. We spend a lot of time with employers. We spend a decent amount of time with stars, not as much as I'd like. We spend a lot of time with providers and increasingly with academics. They can take a lot of your time. They've got a lot of questions.
Good question.
And we've learned a tremendous amount, but I'm learning on this panel. So I'd like to say, look, Opportunity at Work sees our role in helping to solve this problem in kind of 3 stages or 3 parts. The first you've seen illustrated here, it's part of it here, which is we really need the data, and we've talked about this in a lot of different times, to be able to show both what is the size of the opportunity. I think it's very meaningful that it's 71 million stars, that it's 30 million rising stars, that it's 5 million already out of 16, 18 million people who have these high skills, because scale matters for business. As someone who's worked in business a lot, business can do a little bit of anything at once, and you can do that through corporate social responsibility or whatever. But if you're going to try to move the needle on numbers like this, it needs to be systemic. It needs to be in a workflow, right? It needs to be in business process, and it probably needs to be in software. So that's like we are serious. When we say rewire the labor market for Opportunity at Work, we're not done until at least 1 million stars have kind of gained that. And then at that point, we can hand off to the rest of you, because there's a lot more work than 1 million. But if we can do 1 million, then this field can do the rest. So the first thing is getting the data on both this, as Papio was talking about, the supply side, the origins, like what assets do people have, and there's even more work to do on that. We haven't talked about layering over skills from the gig economy. We've talked about there's many other places where you can get that, and we've talked here mainly about on the job. Of course, there's a lot of bite backs and so forth. There's layering on. So there's more work to do there, and then we've already started working on the demand side of that to say how does that map to sort of skills and jobs. So for example, the jobs that people are hiring for. For example, there is we hear a lot that, these are old jobs, but what about the new jobs? And there's this kind of assumption that if it's a new job, you must have to have like lots and lots and lots of education. But why is that?
Yeah.
I mean, a new job by definition, you weren't educated. No one was educated for that, right? My father, who dropped out of college after a year, learned COBOL and got a job as a COBOL programmer, and that was our family's path into the middle class. But no one was learning COBOL in college because it was new then, right? So if you want to be a Salesforce administrator, right, I think what we've demonstrated here is that there's a lot of people with those skills. They would need to be trained to be a Salesforce administrator, but guess what? So do college grads. And this is to your point, LaShana. It's the kind of training people need. Everyone's going to need. It's a question of who are you investing in or not. So changing this idea that we should be spending, the businesses should be spending a ton of money to exclude stars talent, instead of like flipping that and spending a little bit of money to go after and like actually get it. That's sort of the first part of it, this thing. The second part, and it relates to some of the things we're talking about, is how then, once a business decides, this is a talent pool that matters, we want to go after it. And in our experience, the first thing they want to know then is how, and it boils down a little bit to this: if we're not going to screen people out because they don't have the pedigree, how are we going to screen people in? We still can't interview 900 people for a job. And you've mentioned a lot of these things. There's sort of definitions of skills, there's assessments, there's programs, right? Just like reputations of universities, there could be reputations of programs like Byte Back or Merit America or Year Up or Perscolis and whatnot. That's a big opportunity. And then, so what we've done though is to say, look, there's not going to be one answer to 70 million people and and 800 jobs. But what you can do is create an actual learning machine, and that's our STARS talent marketplace. So that is to have, and we're starting in Washington, D.C. next month with Byte Back and Merit America, and soon to expand to others. But to actually say, for employers can say, here's the jobs that we're looking for stars specifically. And employers can say, hey, I want to work with these programs, or I want a Google IT certificate. But what they can also do is say, what are other employers doing, and do that. And so this whole system is designed to to have people learn. And I would love to know, Elizabeth, from your setting, because we've talked about this, how would that system, why are you excited about that?
I mean, it would revolutionize how we place our graduates. It is extremely resource intensive to have to go out and find the right person in each company who's responsible for hiring, convince them to use a different strategy, figure out how to work with their system. I mean, like many providers, we have multiple people on our staff who do just that. That's all they do. And so we're just really excited about the efficiency, about bringing more opportunities to our graduates.
So that's an example. And then the third thing we're doing is thinking about how then can this scale? Because we're not thinking that this Stars Talent Marketplace replaces Indeed or LinkedIn or Workday or any of those. But the thought is, you see a lot in job descriptions, bachelor's degree or equivalent. And I don't know what your experience is with that, but usually that or equivalent is something that a committee decided 5 years ago. It's like outmoded. It sometimes doesn't even make logical sense. It's like an impossibility. But what if that or equivalent was actually this dynamic array of solutions that was being generated in the marketplace by the actual process of learning, right? It's like, oh, let me try Byte back. Oh, okay, I like Byte back. Or hey, I need something, I believe in this certificate. Well, it turns out there's all these providers that I've never heard of that actually do have, provide people with a certificate. That sort of discovery engine, could you plug it in essentially through API integration, right, with these platforms? So we work with these platforms over time, both on the data and to the scale. And from a business standpoint, I'd love to hear this question of scale and workflow, and how much do we need this to be in mainstream hiring tools before this takes off, or mainstream training tools?
From my perspective, a lot of job programs, feels too big, and it almost feels like we got to get local with that. And so what I would say is, from a local pool perspective, the competition that you can derive within a particular community or greater city would be great. For instance, in Minneapolis, I know in Minneapolis-St. Paul, they've got, 12 Fortune 50 companies or Fortune 100 companies there. I'm assuming that would be a great way in that particular geography to create some sort of groundswell of how to actually evaluate what you said is the API component of this, effectively to drive kind of a different talent pool. I think the language that you just described is almost kind of interesting, how we say a BS or BA, BS degree or equivalent. It's like we should rewrite that sentence to be different. And I think that with 12 companies of great size in a particular geography, being able to do that together, that would actually do something. And rather than trying to go, U.S. broad with something extremely large, I think the scale could come more locally.
Right. And what's cool about, because I agree, people get hired locally, right? And I think the marketplace is designed that way, but not every local entity should have to develop a whole system of skills identification and so forth. So it's really thinking about what could be done nationally, and then what has to be done locally, that placement, that relationships, these referrals. And then I think the question I would ask then, because the other part of scaling is on the policy side. Because ultimately, what we're seeing is if there are these different pathways for learning, we don't have the same incentives for all of them. We have a whole infrastructure. It's not perfect, but for college degrees, Pell Grant, student loans, et cetera, there's issues with it. But there's a capacity and resources to go through those pathways. Senator Warner talked about the incentives for companies and for their training, talked about expanding to Pell Grants to certified work. So there's all these issues. But if you look at what we've done in this report, there are thousands of pathways, tens of thousands of pathways that are mapped, and you could actually have the ROI for each. And so Business Roundtable, and I know you're working closely with them, Dan, if you're talking about stakeholder capitalism, the thing about shareholder value is it's measurable. Could there be a measure of what businesses are contributing to raising the value of human capital, which we know accrues mostly to the person? And could that be a measurable way for businesses to really make a difference?
Yes.
Excellent.
No. Amen. So I love every premise in your question. By the way, you are bringing us home. You're wrapping up beautifully, so thank you. How do we take the reformulation of the purpose of a corporation, which Business Roundtable articulated some months back. Yes, Byron, as you rightly note, Doug McMillan, my CEO, is now chairing the BRT. How do we move forward affirming a stakeholder capitalism model where businesses at scale are doing what we do, but where we are really being smart in the way that we're talking with these influential platforms and people who are developing sort of these approaches and systems and tools related to sort of identifying talent, thinking about talent, upskilling. So how do we make sure that we're having the right intense, accelerated conversations with you all at the same time? You know, there's useful work being done now through the American Workforce Advisory Board. There's very important work being done now in the U.S. Congress. You know, may 1,000 flowers bloom, but may you all continue to play a convening role, bringing us together, and let's even work on BRT's agenda as we're thinking about putting meat on the bones of what we mean by stakeholder capitalism.
Thank you. Well, I leave this conversation very excited because I think, look, the fundamental thing here is what you're hearing is that this is not a set of problems and it's not an opportunity we can seize one at a time, right, in isolation, in silos, and it's not something we're likely to solve by accident. But it is something that we could solve together and on purpose. And in doing that, we have a huge advantage in that there are 70 million stars showing up every day, working hard, striving to learn and to contribute. They can do more. They're showing up every day. Our institutions need to show up for them. And I think we made a pretty good start on that today. So thank you very much to all who participated.